You're nothing but a car washer, Daniel. I'm leaving you for a man with real ambition." Melissa Whitmore didn't whisper it. She flung the words across the showroom so they bounced off chrome and glass. Salespeople stalled mid-pitch. A finance manager froze over a credit app, and the delivery specialist stopped unwrapping a satin bow from a new SUV. Melissa wanted an audience. She pointed at her husband beside the wash bay conveyor. Polo damp, sleeves rolled, jeans freckled with soap. "A car washer, Daniel. That's all you'll ever be. I'm done being dragged down by a man who can't even hold this job." Her laughter rang out, sharp and theatrical. Beneath banners and polished hoods, the tall sales manager in the glass office, Anthony Clark, watched with a satisfied half-smirk, as if he'd just closed the month's biggest deal. "Now him," Melissa said, chin high. "He's a real man." What she didn't know, what no one dared say, was that Daniel owned the entire chain whose blue logo crowned highways for 40 miles. She mocked a nobody while the empire stood quietly in his name. Why didn't he fight back? How could a man with everything pretend to have nothing? Who was being tested? And what would happen when the truth finally split the room in two? Engines idled at the service lane. Tire dressing and fresh leather scented the air. Daniel stacked microfiber towels with methodical calm, knuckles raw from heat and chemicals. He carried weight quietly. The click of Melissa's heels returned, sharp as a gavel. "Another job, Daniel," she announced, making sure the showroom heard. "First you quit construction management, then warehouse nights chewed you up. Now rinsing wheels is slipping from your hands." Pens paused. A porter froze with a key fob midair. Anthony pretended to study the sales board, smirk deepening. Daniel didn't flinch. He wiped his palms, lined up bottles of glass cleaner, and kept his eyes low. His silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. "Look at you," Melissa sneered. 45 with nothing to show but suds. I'm embarrassed to carry your name." Two teenagers at the espresso bar stared. Across the glass, a couple paused their test drive walk around. The humiliation was public, and witnessed by Emily, Daniel's 16-year-old daughter, peering from behind a pillar, jaw tight, eyes bright. She saw it, the flicker at his mouth, a storm caged behind calm. Melissa leaned in, perfume sweet and metallic. "1 month, Daniel. Prove you're worth my time, or I walk." She pivoted, threading her arm through Anthony's. The manager gave a showman's grin to the staff and guided her toward his office like seating a VIP. Daniel set the last towel perfectly straight. A radio jingle drifted. The detail bay hissed. He looked once at Emily, and whatever he wasn't saying steadied her shoulders. Then he turned back to the line of cars as if the whole scene were just another streak to wipe clean. His silence said more than any outburst could. It promised patience. It promised memory. It promised a reckoning. Across the glass, the couple resumed walking, but the woman glanced back at Daniel, sensing something unspoken, like thunder far off on a clear day. She shivered. The showroom's noise resumed in pieces, finance printers chirping, a delivery bell, tires thumping as a crossover drifted off the wash conveyor. Yet Melissa's words hung like burned rubber. Emily slipped from the pillar, questions crowding behind her lips. Why had her father taken it? Why hadn't he defended himself? To understand Daniel's quiet, you have to rewind years. He wasn't born in a wash bay. He'd been a structural engineer who signed drawings that turned steel into skylines. A crane accident ended fieldwork, gifting him a limp painkillers dulled but never erased. While colleagues chased titles, he studied cash flow, what moved, what idled, what could be built without pouring concrete. He started small, a distressed independent lot with 4 cars and a flickering "buy here, pay here" sign. He replaced the sign, rewired the books, and learned why some customers default. He learned everything: front-end gross, back-end products, F&I reserve, lender tiers, floor plan interest, days in inventory. He learned people too, how a porter's name remembered on a bad day earns more goodwill than a billboard. By the time Melissa met him, the empire existed, just not on his sleeve. She married calm eyes and a modest rental, believing she'd chosen safe over spectacle. Safety to her meant motion you could photograph. When motion flattened, so did her affection. Her childhood baked that reflex. She could still see the eviction notice taped crooked on her parents' apartment door, her mother scrubbing the glue off after the sheriff left. That tremor never let go. Melissa swore she'd never live where bills spoke louder than love. Anthony felt like insurance. Louder, hotter, always selling instead of being sold. She mistook combustion for competence. Emily noticed a different calculus. She watched her father answer late calls with words like floor plan, turn ratio, warranty chargebacks. She saw how service writers straightened when he approached, and how vendors in pressed polos shook his hand with both of theirs. Once she asked, "Do you own something here?" Daniel smiled. "I own my choices," he said, which was true without being complete. Anthony sensed what Melissa couldn't. When a lender rep arrived, silver tie, manicured confidence, he bypassed Anthony's glass office and detoured to the wash bay to greet Daniel first. "Always a pleasure, sir." Anthony filed it under annoying anomaly, then watched 3 more anomalies that week. A wholesaler, a regional trainer, the CFO from corporate, touring stores, who paused to ask Daniel about reconditioning times, as if the man with wet cuffs wrote policy. Melissa waved away the tells. "Pity handshakes," she scoffed. "They feel sorry for him." Daniel folded towels and said nothing. His silence had edges. It could cut if you grabbed it wrong. That night, beneath the blue glow of the rooftop sign, he stood with Emily and traced constellations. "Some lights look close and burn out fast," he said. "Others look small and last forever." Emily followed his gaze and suspected which kind her father was. The Whitmore name had become Melissa's favorite punchline. At a Saturday dealership barbecue, burgers sizzling on a line of chrome grills, kids chasing balloons. She turned her wine glass into a microphone. "My husband scrubs wheels for teenagers. Imagine that, 45 and still stuck in a wash bay." She laughed, shrill and practiced. Sales associates forced chuckles, but others shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Garcia, the retired wholesaler, shook his head. He'd seen Daniel late at night, walking rows with a clipboard, making quiet notes on depreciation curves. Garcia knew dignity when he saw it. Melissa had no use for dignity. She wanted spectacle. Daniel stood by the smoker, flipping burgers without looking up. The smoke curled around his face, masking the flicker in his eyes. Emily, notebook balanced on her knees, scribbled every word. She hated when her stepmother turned life into theater. Later, Melissa slipped into Anthony's black Mercedes. His hand rested heavy on the gear shift. Casual possession. They drove downtown to a rooftop bar overlooking neon dealerships. Anthony raised a glass. "With me, you'll never scrub poverty again. You'll be first lady of this chain." Melissa's smile stretched. Not from love, from hunger. Anthony played his role well. In the showroom, his voice boomed, knives of charisma cutting through hesitation. "Sign today and I'll have you driving off before the ink dries." He barked orders at staff, waved contracts like a maestro. To Melissa, that was fire, ambition, everything Daniel lacked. But Anthony's temper simmered under the surface. When a junior salesman missed a monthly quota, Anthony slammed a fist on the desk, making coffee slosh. "Customers pay for confidence, not excuses," he roared. Melissa applauded his passion. The younger staff whispered bully behind his back. Meanwhile, Daniel's quiet orbit continued. He washed, stacked, polished, but he also observed. A finance rep who ignored Anthony's calls stopped by to shake Daniel's hand. "Always a pleasure, Mr. Whitmore," he said warmly. Melissa rolled her eyes. "See? Even reps pity you." She didn't hear the respect in the man's tone. Anthony did. His brow furrowed. Vendors, lenders, even visiting auditors seemed to nod differently when Daniel walked past. Not as charity, as deference. Anthony muttered one night, "Funny how suits act like he's someone. I don't like it." Melissa waved him off. "Don't be ridiculous. He's nothing." But Anthony couldn't shake it. The supplier discounts, the corporate auditors who took Daniel's calls first, the staff who straightened when he walked in. Those weren't pity rituals. They were signs of a hierarchy Melissa couldn't read. That evening, Emily cornered her father in the driveway. "Why don't you ever fight back?" she demanded. Daniel knelt, wiping grease from his hands. "Because fighting back too soon gives them the ending they want," he said softly. "Sometimes silence is the sharpest tool." Emily didn't fully understand, but she caught the glint in his eyes. Not resignation. Patience sharpened like a blade waiting for its moment. The courthouse hummed with the shuffle of legal pads and the echo of impatient heels. Attorneys paced like mechanics around cars, each fine-tuning their clients before the engines roared inside. Melissa arrived in a fitted navy dress, her hair sculpted into perfect defiance. She walked beside Anthony, the new sales manager, who carried himself like a man closing the deal of his life. Together, they looked less like a divorcing wife and her ally, more like a couple stepping onto a red carpet. Daniel entered alone. No entourage, no briefcase. Just a plain gray suit that hung a little loose around his shoulders, his limp softened by steady steps. He carried himself with the same deliberate calm that unsettled those who expected him to crumble. When the judge called the case, Melissa's smirk widened. She braced herself for Daniel's begging, for pleas, for last-minute confessions. She rehearsed her lines silently. "Your Honor, I can't stay shackled to a man with no ambition." The judge glanced over the paperwork. "Mr. Whitmore, do you contest this divorce?" The room froze. Melissa's hand tightened on Anthony's arm, expecting drama. Instead, Daniel lifted his eyes, calm and unbroken. "No, Your Honor," he said. "Let her go." Melissa's smirk collapsed. She wasn't ready for surrender. She was ready for a man clawing, crumbling, bleeding. Instead, he released her with the same steadiness he stacked towels in a wash bay. The gavel fell. Papers shuffled. The marriage was officially dismantled. Outside, Anthony leaned close, his cologne sharp. "See? He looks like a man already buried." Melissa forced a smile, but her fingers trembled around her clutch. Daniel walked past them without a glance. Silence heavier than any insult Anthony could have thrown. Melissa thought she had stepped into another life. Anthony whisked her into high-end dinners, poured vintage champagne, and introduced her as "my wife" to colleagues who nodded, dazzled by the show. She wore new gowns each week, each one brighter, louder, more desperate to announce her triumph. When she spotted Daniel in the neighborhood pushing a grocery cart beside Emily, she made sure her laughter carried. "See, Emily," she sneered once within earshot. "That's what happens when you marry small. But me, I chose big." At first, Anthony delivered. He leased a new German car, rented a sleek condo overlooking downtown, and took Melissa to galas where chandeliers dripped like icicles of light. She basked in the reflection, but beneath the gloss, bills stacked. Anthony's temper spilled into work, snapping at staff, demanding manufacturer allocations he couldn't secure, ordering vehicles the market couldn't move. Melissa clung tighter, blind to the whispers. "This won't last," muttered service techs in the bays. Meanwhile, Daniel kept his routine. He washed cars, scrubbed rims, wiped dashboards, yet sales reps still nodded respectfully, suppliers still prioritized his calls. To Melissa, he was invisible. To those who knew, he was the quiet gravity around which the dealership universe turned. The tension at the Whitmore house no longer stayed behind doors. Melissa, draped across the condo's leather sofa, painted her nails crimson while Emily sat at the dining table finishing algebra homework. Without looking up, Melissa muttered, "Your father will never be more than a car washer. He's destined for nothing." Emily's pen froze. Her chest rose and fell once before she lifted her eyes steady as glass. "Funny," she said, voice firm. "Every time people look at him, I see respect. They never look at you that way." The words sliced deeper than Emily realized. Melissa's hand slammed down, rattling the nail polish bottle. "Don't you dare speak to me that way," she hissed. Daniel appeared in the doorway, calm but commanding. "That's enough," he said softly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout. Melissa looked away, but Emily's point lingered, carving its place in the silence. While Emily defended her father at home, Anthony's recklessness at work grew harder to disguise. He barked at salesmen for botched pitches, hurled contracts onto desks when lenders pushed back, and demanded staff address him as Manager Clark with mock formality. Melissa convinced herself it was passion. "It just means he cares about results," she reassured her cocktail friends. But the staff whispered another story. "He's cracking. This won't end well." Anthony's arrogance stretched into financial choices. He convinced Melissa to co-sign loans, swearing they were for expansion. He ordered fleets of high-end SUVs and imported cars that sat sun-baked and unsold on the lot. He bragged that his branch would be the jewel of the chain. The debt piled quietly behind him. Melissa ignored the warning signs. She was too drunk on the prestige of being Mrs. Clark. Meanwhile, Daniel was working in another kind of spotlight. In a glass-walled boardroom, executives leaned forward when he spoke. Reports sprawled across the table. Profit margins, service retention, floor plan costs. One line glared red. Reckless spending at the downtown branch under sales manager Clark. He's burning cash we don't have. Another director added, staff turnover is spiking. Complaints are piling up. Daniel listened, fingers steepled, expression calm. Finally, he said, not yet. Let him keep digging. People need to see him for what he is. The board members exchanged wary glances, but nodded. Daniel's silence wasn't passivity. It was patience sharpened into a blade. Back at the condo, Melissa draped herself in a sequined dress, adjusting her earrings before a gala. Anthony poured her wine with a flourish. Here's to us, he toasted, sloshing Merlot onto the granite counter. The future of this dealership chain belongs to me. Melissa laughed too loudly, believing every word. At the far end of town, Emily sat at her father's table, journaling by lamplight. She watched him take late calls, jot numbers on yellow pads, his expression unreadable but steady. She was beginning to understand. His silence was not defeat, it was timing. And the clock was ticking toward a reckoning only Daniel seemed ready for. The invitation arrived embossed in gold, slipped under Melissa's manicured fingers like a royal decree. She gasped, holding it up to Anthony with trembling excitement. The annual dealership gala, she squealed. This is it, Anthony. This is where everyone will finally see us for who we are. Anthony grinned, puffing his chest. Tonight we cement our place as royalty. He kissed her cheek with the flourish of a man already rehearsing his victory lap. Melissa swelled with pride. She didn't realize she was marching straight toward her undoing. In the days leading up to the gala, Anthony's arrogance spun out of control. At a pre-gala dinner, he raised his glass, sloshing red wine onto the linen. Here's to us. The future belongs to me. Melissa clinked glasses too hard, laughter brittle and loud. Staff watching from the edges whispered, he's cracking. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed late in board meetings. The CFO warned, Clark's spending is bleeding us dry. Another director muttered, customer satisfaction is tanking. Complaints are everywhere. Daniel steepled his fingers, the same posture that once drove Melissa mad. Don't act yet, he said softly. The truth reveals itself best in the right light. The board didn't fully understand, but they trusted him. At home, Emily caught the undercurrent. She saw the emails flagged urgent, the spreadsheets her father studied, the calls he took in clipped, decisive tones. One night she asked, are you going to stop them? Daniel's eyes held hers, calm but unyielding. The stage is setting itself. All we have to do is wait for the curtain. The night of the gala glowed like a showroom under spotlights. Chandeliers rained light across polished marble floors. Tables gleamed with silverware and crystal glasses. The dealership logos were projected in gold across the walls. Melissa arrived in a flowing crimson gown, arm proudly looped through Anthony's. Cameras flashed as she whispered, tonight, they'll all know who really runs this place. Anthony strutted through the ballroom like it already belonged to him. He clapped Daniel on the back as they crossed paths, sneering. Didn't expect to see you here. Careful not to spill drinks, old man. Melissa laughed, her voice sharp, but her fingers gripped Anthony's arm tighter than she meant. Daniel simply smiled faintly and moved on, as though Anthony's presence barely registered. He shook hands with staff, nodded to executives, and slipped quietly to the back of the room. When speeches began, Melissa leaned close to Anthony. This is it. They're setting you up. She raised her glass prematurely, giddy with anticipation. Anthony grinned, soaking in the polite applause that followed each executive's remarks. He imagined his name being called, imagined the spotlight, imagined the photographs splashed across trade journals. At the back of the room, Emily leaned toward her father. Are you really going to let her keep saying these things? She whispered. Daniel placed his hand gently over hers. Patience, Emily. The truth doesn't need to shout. The ballroom tension tightened, stretched like a violin string drawn to the point of breaking. The gala wasn't just a celebration anymore. It had become a stage set for justice. And Melissa, in her crimson gown, had unknowingly stepped into the spotlight of her own ruin. The ballroom lights dimmed. A hush rippled through the crowd as the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone with a polished smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth. "Tonight isn't only about celebrating another year of growth, it's about honoring the vision, the heart, and the steady hands that built this dealership family from the ground up." Melissa's heart soared. She squeezed Anthony's arm so tightly her nails dug into his sleeve. "This is it," she whispered. "They're about to name you." Anthony puffed his chest, smirk stretching wider, already rehearsing his triumphant walk to the stage. The host continued, "We owe our success to a man who chose humility over arrogance, who understood every corner of this business, from the showroom floor to the wash bay." Melissa raised her glass, her crimson lips parted in victory. She was seconds away from basking in reflected glory. Then the name dropped. "Please join me in honoring Mr. Daniel Whitmore." For a heartbeat, silence. Then the ballroom erupted. Applause thundered, chairs scraped, glasses clinked. Executives rose to their feet, staff cheered, camera flashes fired like lightning. From the back of the room, Daniel stood slowly. His gray suit caught the chandelier light, dignified, steady, unhurried. He walked toward the stage with the composure of a man who had been here all along. Melissa's smile cracked. Her glass tilted, spilling crimson wine down her gown like a wound of pride. Anthony's mouth fell open. His smirk dissolved into panic. "No," Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. "No, it can't be." Daniel shook hands with the host, his expression calm. Executives pressed forward, eager to congratulate him. "The foundation of this empire," the host declared, "a man who never forgot the dignity of work." Melissa's world collapsed in slow motion. Every sneer, every insult, every cruel word she'd hurled replayed in her mind. The barbecue, the showroom, the courthouse. She had mocked him for scrubbing tires while he quietly held the keys to the kingdom. Anthony's face burned red. He leaned toward Melissa, voice venomous. "You tricked me. You made me think he was nothing." Melissa turned to him, desperate. I didn't know." Anthony yanked his arm from hers. "You were supposed to be my ticket in. Instead, you tied me to a man who owns me." His voice was low, sharp as a blade. On stage, Daniel took the microphone. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look toward Melissa. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. This dealership family wasn't built on titles or power plays. It was built by the men and women who sell, service, clean, and deliver with pride. True success isn't measured by how loudly you boast, but by how deeply you respect. Applause crashed again, louder than before. Emily, seated near the stage, beamed, pride glowing in her young face. Melissa trembled, her crown of arrogance shattered, her reflection in the crystal glass unrecognizable. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was the fool who mocked her own king. The gala ended in a storm of applause, but for Melissa the sound blurred into a dull roar. Her ears rang, her breath came shallow, her crimson gown clung heavy with spilled wine. She stumbled into the parking lot beneath buzzing street lamps, heels scraping against the asphalt. Anthony stormed beside her, face tight with fury. He dug the car keys from his pocket with jerking movements. "You tricked me," he hissed, shoving the keys into the ignition. Melissa spun toward him, eyes wide, voice desperate. "How was I supposed to know? He never told me." Anthony let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting like glass. "Don't you get it? He didn't need to tell you. Everyone else already knew. The staff, the lenders, the board, everyone but you." He slid into the driver's seat, knuckles white on the wheel. Melissa reached for the door handle, but Anthony locked it with a sharp click. The window rolled down just enough for his final words to slice through. "You were leverage. Now you're dead weight." The tires screeched as he sped off, leaving Melissa standing alone, bathed in the cold glow of the lamps. Her breath fogged in the night air, but her pride burned hotter than fire. For the first time, she felt the weight of abandonment. Not Daniel's silence, not the board's applause, but Anthony's rejection. The next morning, Melissa appeared outside one of the dealerships, her hair unkempt, makeup smudged into bruised shadows under her eyes. She spotted Daniel stepping out of a staff meeting, Emily at his side, a line of salesmen trailing behind him with clipboards and respect in their eyes. "Daniel!" she cried, rushing forward, her voice cracking. "Please, I didn't know. I was wrong. Give me another chance. We can fix this." Daniel stopped, Emily's hand tightening protectively around his arm. Melissa's eyes darted between them, desperate for mercy. Daniel's voice was calm, almost gentle, but final. "You had your chance. What you want now isn't me. It's what I built." Melissa's knees weakened. Her mouth opened, but the words collapsed into sobs. Daniel guided Emily toward the waiting car, never glancing back. His silence weighed more than any insult Melissa could conjure. Inside the car, Emily looked at him, eyes shining with pride. "I knew you were more than she ever saw." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the people who laugh loudest are the blindest," he said. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, staff whispered about Anthony's sudden firing. Videos surfaced online, clips of him screaming at salesmen, hurling contracts, berating service techs. One viral clip showed him slamming a desk so hard a customer stormed out. His reputation disintegrated overnight. No reputable dealership would hire him now. He ended up hawking used cars at a roadside lot, shouting over buzzing neon signs, selling lemons for commission scraps. Melissa's fall would be slower, but crueler. Melissa's fall began quietly. At first, it was just overdue statements stacking on the marble counter of the condo, envelopes slid open with trembling nails. Anthony's name was gone now, just hers inked across the co-sign loans he had convinced her were temporary. The sleek German car was the first to go. A tow truck hooked it under the glare of morning light, hauling it down the street as neighbors peeked through blinds. Melissa stood in her silk robe on the balcony, hands clutching the rail until her knuckles whitened. The condo followed. Eviction notices piled beside her half-finished martinis. She fought to keep appearances, posting photos of dresses she could no longer afford, cropping out the empty wine glasses and peeling wallpaper behind her. Her friends began to disappear too. Women who once clinked glasses with her at rooftop bars stopped answering calls. When Melissa showed up unannounced, dressed in last season's heels, they whispered excuses about busy schedules and slipped away. The jewelry box emptied next. Rings pawned for pennies, bracelets sold to strangers who didn't care about the stories attached. Even the diamond Anthony once slid on her finger vanished, leaving only a pale indentation, a ghost of sparkle. By contrast, Daniel's empire bloomed. The dealerships thrived under his guidance. Instead of cutting corners, he raised wages, added bonuses, funded scholarships for mechanics, and created health benefits unheard of in the industry. Competitors scoffed at first, then quietly tried to copy him. When asked by a reporter why he did it, Daniel answered with the same quiet steadiness that had once been mistaken for defeat. A chain is only as strong as the hands that hold it together. The story went national. Headlines praised him as the silent giant of auto sales. Staff loyalty soared, sales records broke. Daniel never boasted, but the world saw what Melissa never had. Emily flourished in that glow. She walked beside her father at conferences, shaking hands with executives twice her age. She listened closely to his quiet explanations about margins and market shifts. At school, her essays carried wisdom beyond her years, on dignity, loyalty, and the danger of arrogance. Teachers marveled. Melissa saw snippets of this new life from the shadows. Once she stood across the street from a dealership, watching Daniel step out in a tailored suit, surrounded by smiling employees and a radiant Emily at his side. She pressed her hand against the glass of a diner window, her reflection superimposed over their joy. Her eyes stung. Back at her new job, a cheap roadside diner, Melissa carried trays of greasy burgers and chipped mugs of coffee. Her feet ached, her apron stained. Each clatter of a plate reminded her of the day she mocked Daniel for scrubbing tires. Now she scrubbed tables for tips, and every laugh, every cheer she overheard drifting from the dealership lot was a reminder of the life she had thrown away. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried onions. the kind of place where customers came for speed, not atmosphere. Melissa tied her apron tighter and balanced a tray of chip mugs. Her heels had been traded for discount flats that rubbed blisters into her ankles. At a booth near the window, a young family smiled up at her as she set down their plates. The little girl chirped, "Thank you, ma'am." The word ma'am cut Melissa like a blade. For a fleeting moment, she saw Emily at that age, bright-eyed, tugging at Daniel's sleeve, always asking questions. The memory made her chest ache. The bell above the door jingled. Melissa turned, tray in hand, and froze. Daniel stepped inside, taller somehow, his gray suit neat but understated. He didn't carry arrogance, only presence. Beside him walked Emily, no longer a timid teenager hiding behind journals, but a young woman in a sharp blazer, her posture confident, her smile radiant. She belonged in a boardroom, not a back seat. Melissa's hands trembled so badly one of the mugs rattled on the tray. They hadn't noticed her yet. Daniel greeted the hostess warmly, then shook hands with a busboy who once worked at one of his dealerships. Emily laughed at something he whispered, her eyes glowing with admiration. Melissa felt her throat tighten. That laughter used to echo in her own home. Now it belonged to a world she had thrown away. When Daniel's gaze finally landed on her, his expression didn't change. No anger, no triumph, just a calm nod, polite and distant, like acknowledging a stranger. Emily's reaction was colder. She looked at Melissa only briefly, her jaw tight, eyes hard, before turning her attention back to her father. Melissa wanted to speak, to apologize, to beg, but her tongue refused to move. The gulf between them was wider than wealth. It was carved by choices, each one hers. Daniel and Emily took a booth near the corner. Melissa caught fragments of their conversation as she refilled a nearby table's coffee. "Dad," Emily said, her voice confident, "if we add extended warranties as a bundled package, our retention will climb even higher." Daniel smiled, pride softening his face. "Smart thinking. You're seeing the long game." Melissa's heart twisted. She had once dismissed Emily's sharpness as childish rebellion. Now she saw her daughter inheriting everything she had mocked: discipline, patience, vision. As Melissa cleared plates, she risked another glance. Daniel leaned across the table, speaking softly, his hand resting gently over Emily's. They laughed together, their bond unbreakable, untouchable. When they left, Daniel held the door open for Emily. The evening sun framed them in golden light as they stepped outside, father and daughter moving as one. Melissa pressed her palm against the diner's glass, watching them disappear down the street. Her reflection stared back, apron stained, crown shattered, dignity gone. For the first time, she realized Daniel's silence had never been weakness. It had been strength, and she had mocked it until there was nothing left for her to hold. Melissa's world shrank to the size of a diner booth and a paycheck that barely covered rent on a peeling one-bedroom apartment. Once, she strutted through ballrooms in sequined gowns. Now she woke to the clatter of pipes and paper-thin walls, and eviction notices slipped under her door. Her phone buzzed constantly, but not with invitations. Creditors left voicemails that started polite and ended threatening. The women who once sipped cocktails at her side ignored her messages. Their feeds glimmered with new dresses, new vacations, new scandals. Melissa had become old gossip, too fated to trend. At night, she sat alone at the kitchen table, light flickering above, staring at the faint tan line on her finger where Anthony's ring had once gleamed. She remembered the promises he had whispered over candlelight. "With me, you'll never scrub poverty again." Now poverty had her scrubbing diner counters for tips. Meanwhile, Daniel's orbit expanded. He streamlined dealership operations, introduced loyalty programs, and funded vocational scholarships for auto technicians. Media outlets painted him as a visionary, the quiet reformer who proved compassion and profit could coexist. Board meetings no longer debated his decisions. They leaned forward, pens ready, waiting for his steady voice. He was the axis now, and everyone knew it. Emily blossomed under his mentorship. She shadowed executives, attended industry conferences, and asked questions that left grown men blinking. At school, she was unstoppable. Essays about integrity won awards, speeches about loyalty earned standing ovations. Teachers spoke of her as if she already carried her father's legacy in her bones. Melissa watched from the outside. Once she lingered across the street as Daniel and Emily stepped out of a dealership, staff circling them like family. Emily's laughter rang out, proud and unguarded. It was a sound Melissa hadn't heard directed at her in years. She turned away quickly, her throat raw. At the diner, Melissa carried trays heavier than her pride. One evening, a group of young sales associates came in, laughing about quotas. She overheard one of them say, "Mr. Whitmore's daughter is a genius. She's going to run the company one day." Melissa nearly dropped her tray. She ducked into the kitchen, pressing her back against the wall, tears streaking down her cheeks. That should have been her life. Glamorous galas, proud introductions, a daughter who looked up to her. Instead, she wore an apron that smelled of onions while her daughter carried her father's legacy. And Daniel, her Daniel, had never raised his voice, never gloated, never even looked back. That silence was the cruelest cut. The gulf between them was final now. Daniel and Emily's world grew brighter, while hers dimmed to neon diner lights and the clang of greasy pans. She had traded loyalty for ambition. In the end, she had neither. The diner was nearly empty, just the hum of a soda machine and the low murmur of two truckers at the counter. Melissa moved slowly, balancing a tray of chipped mugs, her back aching, her shoes worn thin. Every shift felt longer than the last, her life measured in refills and tips. She caught her reflection in the diner's streaked window. Once she had been a woman draped in gowns under chandeliers, her laughter loud enough to silence rooms. Now she was a shadow in polyester, apron stained, mascara smudged. The bell above the door jingled. Melissa turned, and her breath caught. Daniel walked in, composed as ever, his gray suit pressed, his presence commanding without effort. Emily followed, radiant in a navy blazer, her confidence sharp as polished chrome. She carried herself like someone who belonged at the helm of an empire. Melissa froze, tray pressed against her chest. They didn't notice her at first. Daniel greeted the hostess warmly, shaking the hand of a busboy who once worked at one of his dealerships. Emily laughed at something her father whispered, her pride in him clear. Finally, their eyes met. Daniel's gaze was steady, kind even, but distant. He acknowledged her with the same nod he might offer a stranger on the street. No bitterness, no gloating, just a quiet recognition that she no longer had any place in his story. Emily, however, turned her face away, jaw tight, eyes cold. To her, Melissa wasn't just a mistake. She was a ghost. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came. Apologies clogged her throat, heavy with years of pride. She wanted to say, "I'm sorry," to beg, to explain, but she knew it was too late. The choices she had made had carved a canyon between them that nothing could bridge. Daniel and Emily slid into a booth, ordering simple meals. They laughed together, sketched out plans, shared dreams. Melissa hovered at the counter, watching from a distance, heart aching with every smile that wasn't hers. When they rose to leave, Daniel held the door open for Emily. The evening sun bathed them in golden light, a portrait of dignity and strength walking into the future. Melissa stepped forward instinctively, but stopped herself. She pressed her hand against the glass, watching them fade into the glow of the street. The reflection staring back at her was a woman broken, her crown shattered into shards she could never piece together. Outside, Daniel's voice carried softly to Emily, almost like a benediction. "People chase status," he said, "but forget character. True wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's in loyalty, patience, and love. Betrayal destroys faster than poverty ever could." The car door shut. The engine hummed to life. The taillights glowed like distant stars as they disappeared into the night. Melissa lowered her head, tears streaking her cheeks. For the first time she understood. Daniel's silence had never been weakness. It had been strength all along, and she had mocked it, until it was the only thing she had left to remember him by.